Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frederick Winsness, and I am with NetHope and the NetHope Solutions Center. We want to welcome everybody here today to yet another NetHope Solutions Center webinar. And today we're having another webinar in the series of the ICT4D conference. And the title of today's seminar is Taking Action on Data. And very excited to have Catholic Relief Services not only producing this series of webinars, but also be part of the presentations today. We also have FHI 360 talking about their data experience and sharing their lessons learned. Before we get underway, I'll go over some housekeeping so everybody has the correct expectations. I've muted everyone, and please stay muted so we can minimize any background noise. We are, as usual, doing a question and answer session towards the end of the hour today. So please open up the chat window, follow along with other people's questions, and line up your own questions for discussions and Q&A towards the end of the hour today. We will also ask you to answer an online survey. At the end, I will place in the chat window a webinar satisfaction poll, and we would certainly appreciate you answering those questions. And we are recording this session today. The recording and the slides will be posted to the NetHope Solutions Center, and you can go there to review the session. We'll send you an email with a link to that webpage, and you should feel free to share that with your colleagues and people you know might be interested in taking action on data. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to our moderator today, Sonia Ruchel. She is the ICT4D Conference Manager and Global Knowledge and Information Management at Catholic Relief Services. Sonia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Frederick. So before I introduce our expert speaker panel, I would like to ask you a question. We have a few poll questions within this webinar to get a better idea of who's in the audience, but also I think it will be of interest to everybody in this group. So the first question is what type of organization you're representing. So if you could please tick the relevant box in the bar on your right hand side. So it's either whether you're representing an NGO, charity, Red Cross, or UN government, donor, development bank, if you're representing the private sector, academia, or any other organization we might have missed in the list. We will share that information in a moment. So in the meantime, it's my pleasure to welcome you as well to our webinar on taking action on data. So this was a very popular topic as our research showed that really managing the increasing volumes of data and the complexities is really one of the bigger challenges that development and humanitarian aid organizations are facing. And so we assembled an expert speaker panel for you to provide practical insights and also answer a lot of your questions. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. So we'll have Steve Helen. He's the Director of ICT4D and GIS at Catholic Relief Services, and he will be presenting together with his colleague John Mulqueen. He is a meal manager at Catholic Relief Services. And then we have a second presentation that will be co-presented by Dr. Subhashini Kansancharan. Sorry, I completely mispronounced this. I'm sorry, Shubha. How do you pronounce your name? Can we give? Oh, no, we can't. Okay.
Hi, Shubha Chandrasekharan. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I should have checked that earlier. I was very late on joining this webinar. So we'll stick to Shubha if we may.
Yes, that would be fun.
And she's a consultant, an independent consultant with Health Enabled, and can also share experiences from her previous engagement with USAID. and she will be co-presenting with Abdul Barif Farhari. He's the technical advisor of the Mobile Solutions Technical Assistance Research Project, also called short MSTAR, for FHI 360. So we have some really fantastic presentations coming up for you, and also a lot of time for questions for the speakers, and also with regards to their presentations or general about data management. And now we have the results of our poll. So we have, I'd say the vast majority of our audience is representing an NGO, charity, or Red Cross organization. So that is over half of the participants. We have one representative from UN government donor development, 4 representatives from the private sector, 3 from academia, and we also have a few that are not having answered this poll. So we have a few more poll questions for you to give you some ideas. I think the next slide is our second poll question. So this is with regards to your role in data management. So we would like to ask you again to click on the right-hand side of your screen and tick the relevant box of what role you play in data management, so whether it is around data collection or generation, data analysis or data models, visualization, data processing, storage or database, or giving data advice, or for example, legal advice around compliance, or again, any other area we might have missed. And we will share the results of this poll after our first presentation. So we'll keep you at suspense. And I think that's possible, right? I think so. That's what we've done prior. So our first presentation will be by Steve Helen and John Mulqueen from Catholic Relief Services. So I'm handing over the microphone to Steve Helen. Thank you.
Or to me?
Yes.
Great.
Ahead, Steve.
Perfect. A few years ago in rural Madagascar, we were running a program that was aiming to reduce childhood stunting due to malnutrition. And the particular area where this program was working, we were seeing stunting rates that were in the neighborhood of 57%. And when I went out and worked with this project, I was absolutely shocked to see that they were planning much of their operations on hand-drawn maps like the one you're seeing on the left-hand side. When we're talking about the opportunity to affect lives and have impact at very, very dramatic levels, the people in the communities that we're serving absolutely deserve our best. This particular project turned out to be really a resounding success story for us that I think kind of nicely encapsulates our data journey. And it started with digitizing the field data collection, the household registration, the demographic information capture across several 100,000 households in very remote environments, and then taking that data to plan the delivery sites for food rations, and using some advanced spatial analytic tools where we use the topography of the land to model walking speed and walking times. We're able to see very dramatic results across about 150 distribution sites. We saw consistency that people were coming to receive their food rations go up by about 26%, and walking times cut in about half. Let me tell you a little bit about our organization. So while we work in a number of different sectors, our 3 primary focus areas are emergency response, agriculture, livelihoods, and health. Last year, we were about a $900 million organization doing work in 112 countries where we reached about 121 million people. As I think about our data journey, I think about kind of the simple definition of data. And at CRS, my observation was we're doing a pretty good job at data collection. We literally have hundreds of projects where we send folks out with smartphones and tablets working in highly unique operating contexts to collect information. We're also doing a decent job at using that data to report back to our donors, just for basic accountability purposes. But really the missed opportunity was on the analytics side, that we were not treating those rich data sets as an asset that could be used to shape and improve our program delivery. So our data journey kind of has 5 elements to it. I'm going to speak very briefly to 4 of them and then turn to my colleague who's going to go into an example of one of our particular programs. So this idea of elevating the conversation, for us, this started with our last agency strategy that we launched in 2014. And there were 2 of the core competencies that we said are really critical for our organization directly intersect with our use of data. The first being monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. And the second being information and communication technology for development, or ICT4D. So really elevating that to the top of the organization, to the top of the priority, and then building on that with, as we kind of went a little bit deeper on what is the direction we want to take our ICT4D work, we elevated this idea of data for evidence-based decision-making as our primary area of focus, the thing that we really want to hone our skills, develop our capabilities to improve our program efficacy. The second area we focused on was what I'll call rules, tools, and schools. So the rules kind of being the guardrails that our staff can work within. So this is things like deploying an agency-wide information security awareness program and require training for our 7,000 staff, putting in place data privacy and protection guidelines, and a current effort is developing responsible data values and principles that will help us more adeptly respond to evolving donor requirements around data sharing, open data, and an evolving regulatory landscape. In continuing that rules, tools, and schools, so in the tools section, we really set a laser focus on a finite set of tools. So for us, we kind of put a stake in the ground and said we'll be an Esri shop for our geospatial tools, for data visualization and kind of self-service data exploration. We've coalesced around Power BI. And then we have a variety of other niche tools, whether it's SPSS for statistical analysis or other more basic reporting capabilities, and made these tools all highly accessible to our staff through a self-service online catalog. And then the idea of schools, recognizing that there's a wealth of resources around these industry-leading tools. We don't want to be in the business of creating our own training programs, but rather curating training curriculums of material that's readily available that really is germane to our work so that our staff can take advantage of these tools and really up their own capabilities. The third work stream is around support and partnerships, and this is really all about bringing together the right human resources to support very diverse project needs. And so I look at this as kind of a spectrum of options. One end of the spectrum is a volunteer program that we have for GIS professionals and partnerships with other volunteer organizations. We've had great success with interns. Some of our largest programs in country operations hire dedicated staff in the analytic and geospatial realm. And then we've put in place a variety of master service agreements with companies that can bring deeper expertise to augment what we have in-house. And as I talk with project teams about what is suitable for them, I kind of lay out this as an array of options from low to high cost, low to high predictability, and suitability for complex efforts. And then finally, the idea of embedding our use of data and data analytics into our standard practices. I'll mention kind of three elements here. First was a few years ago, we invested in Salesforce as our platform to track our global program portfolio so that all of our project data is now housed in one location. And then the second step there was recognizing that we will continue to have a very heterogeneous set of data collection tools using Salesforce as kind of a single entry point to access those distinct data sets. And then the final piece in this journey was around aggregating from those diverse data sets into standard indicators. And for us, it's really in our agriculture work that we're seeing some coalescing around a standard set of indicators. So I'm going to pause at this point, turn over to John, who's going to take us into a little bit of DType example that's showing the art of what's possible when you put these elements together.
Great, thanks a lot, Steve. So just briefly a background of the example I'm going to talk about with what I'm working on with CRS is that I'm the meal manager for a U.S. Department of Agriculture funded Food for Education project. So a critical element of making that project work is tracking the state deployment of commodities and meals being served in a school setting. And so, as Steve said, like one of the things that we've generally done very well in CRS is collecting and reporting on a lot of data, but not always necessarily about taking all that wealth of information and then applying it in a very useful way. In the LEAPS project, the Food for Education project that I'm working with, we have a ton of data that comes in. We estimate somewhere over 1 million data points annually. So it can be very difficult to make sure that we use that regularly. And so we've coalesced around Power BI to make that something that's easier for us to do to process this information very quickly. So if you, hopefully everyone can see this screen, this is one dashboard that we use on a monthly basis to sort of track how well we're doing to meet our targets and where we might not be meeting those targets, specifically around the number of meals served on a monthly rate. So up top here, we see like every month what we were intending to serve in this green line and the black line below it. And then in this one here, we can see like a cumulative rate, how we're doing. But then probably more interesting is this area over here in the bottom right, where we can see by our different project districts, the rate at which they're serving meals, the rate at which they're cooking. And so what's really clearly jumps out is this one district is very red. They're not cooking very often. So we know in this particular case that school was delayed, excuse me, schools in that district were delayed in being able to cook because there was some problems with construction of school equipment. So we knew that already, but we were able to see this. But what was more interesting then was that we know that we're behind in cooking because of this one district. But this allowed us to sort of see, you know, there's still pretty low cooking rates in some of these other districts behind it. It's not all just coming from this one place. So it's not like we can just think, well, we'll let that district catch up and then we'll be okay. There's still some work we had to do in other places. And Power BI also has a really good ability to let it be very exploratory. So if I had another question when I'm thinking about this, I can interact with the visualizations to learn a bit more. So maybe I want to see drilling up, like, is there a positive trend over time? And instead of having districts on the x-axis here, it changes to the time period, the project periods. And so you see that, okay, that we are definitely making change over time. These cooking rates are becoming more green. We're cooking at a higher rate over time. So it's something that we're moving past. Something else that we're really focusing on using now is that for U.S. Department of Agriculture, reporting on commodity losses at any given point has become a really important element for them worldwide. And so in order to make sure that that time between detecting some sort of a loss of commodity, whether from spoilage or damage from a storm, to make sure that that time period is short as possible, we started using alerts in Power BI combined with Flow. So we have some indicators that pop up and generate automatically based on the number of commodity that's reported lost. If it meets some sort of a criteria, say 25 kilograms is reported lost at any given time, then Flow, Microsoft Flow will generate an automatic email and send it out to the commodities manager, the program manager, people who need to know about this immediately so they can determine if it's something that we need to report to the donor, if there's some sort of a critical issue that's happening. So it allows us to turn around a process that could have been very slow or could be very risky otherwise and make it as immediate as we can possibly do. And so when they get that email alert, it'll bring up a different dashboard that shows, where the losses are occurring, which districts in our project areas, what's the value of these losses, is it sort of a trend over time, or are we seeing a big spike? And again, they can sort of explore by time or looking at certain places. So these are just some sort of kind of brief examples of ways that we're looking at project data very specifically to immediately turn that into action and make some efforts about it. Sorry, can I go full screen? I missed that comment, sorry. I'll show you one more dashboard that we're working with, and hopefully it'll be a little easier to see. This one is a little bit more around metadata, so it's not so much about the information that our field staff are reporting exactly, but it's also very important for us to have complete and timely data. So this is a dashboard about all of the forms that need to be submitted on a monthly basis, and it allows management staff or field staff to know if people are submitting their forms on time and completely. This one here shows each project month. The green part is the number of forms submitted, and the gray is what's left to be done. So we can see in previous months we've had nearly 100% completion rate. We have a lot more to go for the rest of the year. But this is live updating, so we can see in a given month how far along we are. Right now we're about 72% complete for the month. And we can see if there's anything that's outstanding, or we have some people who are late turning their forms in, and it allows us to make sure that we get the data on time, because if it's not on time, then we can't make any decisions with it, and it's not useful. So there's a lot of opportunities to sort of automate these data processes to make it so that a huge amount of data doesn't just wallow to be analyzed 6 months after it's useful. So that's really briefly what we're doing in Leaps. And with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John and Steve. This is also a quick reminder for anybody. Please, ask your questions in the chat room. So we will have some time for Q&A afterwards. So if you have any specific questions about the presentation, or please put them in the chat room. So I'd just like to share the results from our last poll when we asked about your role in data management, to get a better idea of who we have in the audience. Where do I see this? Okay, I'm not sure where I see it. I see the questions. Okay. Maybe. Okay. I'm not sure where to see this poll, so maybe we'll just share the information later. And yeah, so we do have one more, but I don't seem to have access to change the slides. Could we maybe have the next slide, please, or the results to the poll question? No. Okay. So we'll just share the results later, but we do have another question for you, which I think could be of interest. we like to, this is very much linked to our next presentation. So we like to ask you, do you have responsible data policies or practices at your organization? So please do let us know if you already have one in place, if you're currently implementing one, if you have implemented one for somebody else, or if this is not relevant to you, or no, you're not interested and not convinced yet. So this is a very good sort of way to introduce, I would say, our next presentation. So our next presentation will be, could I have the next slide, please? Or we hand it over. No.
I think you're in control again now, Sonia.
I am? Maybe. Oh, excellent. Okay. So the next presentation will explain a bit more about the principles for digital development, as well as share more practical insights. So I will pass this on to our first speaker, Shubha, and she will be presenting together with her colleague Bari from FHI 360. So Shubha, over to you.
Thanks, Sonia. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yeah, we can.
Great. I have control of the presentation. Thank you, everyone. My name is Shubha Chandrasekharan, and I'm a consultant at Health Enabled. But today, me and Bari, we're going to talk about a little bit of the work that I had the opportunity to do over the last 2 years as a AAA Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the USAID Center for Digital Development in the Global Development Lab. And this was around developing responsible data practices for digital development. So I will draw upon that work, and which I did from September 2015 to 2017 in partnership with the MSTAR project at FHI 360. To get started, I think everyone here is probably familiar with the principles for digital development. Increasingly, as digital projects are being deployed for development in various sectors of programming, development practitioners came together on identifying what they saw as common sense knowledge that they had gathered from trying and failing and implementing development projects with digital technologies, and sort of synthesized them into these 9 principles for digital development. And one of these principles of digital development was address privacy and security, which, as many practitioners might be quite familiar, turns out to be quite challenging in practice. Protecting privacy and data security have both real and perceived issues. And as you can see from these reports and comments from development practitioners, including a recent report about security lapses for data in a cash transfer program, that data protection and privacy is pretty challenging to do in practice. And indeed, many development organizations and donors are beginning to develop both solutions, technological solutions, and good practices and policies for data privacy and security. But if you go back a second and look at the principles for digital development, you also see that in addition to having a principle which says that we must take privacy protection and data security seriously, there is also a principle that says that we have to be data-driven, which means sometimes you need very fine-tuned, very granular data in order for decision-making. And to be data-driven also means that frequently we're going to have to collect more data, especially as reporting requirements and indicators from donors might change as they become more data-driven in their decision-making. And at the same time, you have Principle 6, which also highlights the importance of using open data or making data available and sharing data for public goods, transparency, and accountability. So even within the principles of digital development, we see these tensions around data use, protecting privacy and security, being data-driven, which means collecting data, granular data, probably geotagged data, in order to make better decisions, and also to share data and to open up data for decision making. So when we go back to these questions of how do you balance these tensions around data, one of the questions that we began to encounter at USAID, talking with many implementing partners and USAID staff, is what does it mean to be responsible with the data? And certainly responsible data as a movement had started taking root within development practitioners, within many organizations like Oxfam, CRS, World Vision, the UN, World Food Program, all beginning to develop and converge around these ideas of being responsible with data. But if you ask practitioners, what does it mean to be responsible? You can hear any number of these things. It could mean protecting privacy and security. It could mean make sure that your data has good quality. It could mean compliance with all the requirements that you have. It could mean openness. It could mean simple good data management practices. It could mean accountability, being accountable to beneficiaries, to donors, with data, making those decisions. And increasingly, we were also hearing about what is legally allowed for us to do with data, how we collect it, how we store it, how we share it, and how we analyze it, especially with changing legal regimes both in the EU and worldwide. So this was sort of the beginning of the Responsible Data Practices for Digital Development project. But as we began to explore these concepts of being responsible more and more, what we realized was beyond all those attributes of being responsible that I just showed you, increasingly development practitioners are facing ethical dilemmas when it comes to both the problems and the opportunity that they have with digital technologies and data. I'm going to just illustrate two very quick examples which are very familiar to many people in this room. Let's start with the one on the top. Let's imagine that we are implementing a program to prevent maternal-to-child transmission of HIV. And this is in a part of Africa where access to clinics for diagnostic testing is constrained and by geography. And now you have an opportunity, because of increasing penetration of cell phone, mobile phone use, that you could simply use text messaging to give information to a woman who's delivered her baby in a clinic somewhere else from a diagnostic lab. And this information would say whether she has, whether she's HIV positive or whether the baby is HIV positive, and we need to actually start quick treatment. But what if this phone is not owned by the woman herself? In fact, many of you are familiar that phones are shared in family. What if this information about her HIV status is not well known across extended family members? While we have the opportunity to possibly make a better delivery of information, better decisions with that information using technology, we also run the risk of exposing her and really just exposing loss of confidentiality upon her status of being HIV positive. Let's look at another situation, for example, of refugees and displaced populations. And here we have an example in the middle of the possibility of being able to use, say, biometric information for delivery of services or cash transfer. I'm sorry, what's going on?
Je veux continuer à améliorer cette base. Maintenant, règle-moi avoir un diapo, le dernier diapo, lui, il est comment?
I'm sorry, should I continue?
Yes, please continue. I think we have it fixed. Sorry about that.
Okay. Was the question addressed to me, or was it?
To be honest, I think we will do the questions as planned at the end of the, the presentation. So yeah, just like to continue. Thank you.
We can imagine a situation where we use biometric data for tracking delivery of services, say, or cash transfers to displaced individuals. But increasingly, as we think about collecting and sharing and storing biometric information, especially with highly vulnerable people who have lost everything in their homes, we ask ourselves the question of how can we do this in the right way? How can we do this ethically? Do these people actually have a choice of not sharing biometric information when they know that they have frequently do not have other forms of identification that they can share to establish their identity? Or do we also have a situation where they really have left with no choice but to share their biometric information in order to receive the services that they need? And these are the sort of ethical dilemmas that development practitioners frequently face nowadays as we begin to think about how we begin to use the data that enables by digital technologies in order to deliver our programs, in order to benefit those who we try to reach with our programs, but at the same time protect them against the risks of harm because they are vulnerable. So as we began to explore the use of data in digital development programs, we realized that there are inherent tensions that data use creates, and I'll just give a couple of examples. For example, in a cash transfer program, we often need personally identifiable information, such as their name, some sort of identification, maybe their cell phone number. And this is very useful for accountability and for audit trails. But at the same time, how we use that information, who shares it, who accesses it, etc., has real implications for privacy laws. Take another example. For example, if we had very granular data, in a situation could be where we are able to look at a set of data that's now then disaggregated by gender, sex, or by, say, the HIV positive status, or, for example, even by certain behaviors, such as key populations who we are trying to deliver HIV prevention services to. Granular data might be very helpful for analysis, but at the same time, this could result in loss of confidentiality. Similarly, we would open up data, for example, about, say, real estate holdings in some part of Africa. And this might be good for public good and transparency and even civil sector societies, but sometimes that data can actually reveal embarrassing facts, which even governments might not want to see out there published. Sometimes open data can be misused or have unintentional uses that we never anticipated. So these are the tensions that we were frequently dealing with when we had to think about how we use data for decision making in both the legal way, in what you're required to do, but also in the right way. And this led to a 2-year project of research for responsible data practices for digital development at USAID. We began to recognize that frequently being responsible requires an active and systematic approach of understanding the benefits and the risks of data, and balancing those out, and also beginning to parse those benefits and risks across the different stakeholders who will be involved in a particular project. Leading from that, we began to think about how we would develop a responsible data practice guidelines approach. And we started out with some basic fact-finding around USAID and its implementing partners. And this is where I'm going to hand it over to Bari, who's going to give you a brief overview of the responsible data practices for digital development project.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, can I get the control of the slides? Okay. By the time I get the control of slides, I think I can continue with the same slide. So thank you very much. I think as Shubha alluded to, it becomes very much clear that it's quite a complex situation that requires a more holistic approach, that we need to think about how to become responsible when we deal with data. And so we actually faced quite a number of challenges when we were working on these practice guidelines for responsible data. The first challenge that we encountered was actually, there's basically no simple rule to follow to adequately or easily address all aspects of responsible data. Definitely there are going to be trade-offs that are required, and they need to periodically be assessed in emerging situations and contexts. And this is something that, this philanthropic community and the foreign assistance world is actually increasingly felt, that the need is actually increasingly felt across all these organizations. The second thing is about the cultural change around the data and digital development. It has just begun in that space. We just saw this principles for digital development, the good data management practices to infuse better and efficient use of data into programs has just begun. And the third thing is about the technological change was a major challenge that we faced across throughout this research project. Because technology is increasingly changing at a higher pace, this increasing digitization of once paper-based processes opens up opportunity for improved data analysis and transparency, but at the same time, as Shubha alluded to, also increases the risk for manipulation of privacy breach. So we all know about the use of digital identities in the context of development sector, or in general about inclusion and the need for people to be recognized, to have kind of like a full citizenship role in the global economy. But at the same time, we don't have quite good handoff on how these technologies are spread and are being used in unanticipated ways. So, and then real and perceived risk to privacy actually is another issue. You know, without explicitly addressing privacy or security, the vulnerable populations that USAID and implementing partners are serving, the appropriate collection, storage, and use of data will be hindered in a desire to do no harm. So we also figured out that the current practices across USAID and the implementing partners are pretty much ad hoc. You know, they're highly vulnerable and not standardized. They range from, you know, people who are highly experienced and implementing partners who are highly experienced to none at all. You know, some existing standards such as IRBs or informed consents do not always apply to many digital technology solutions such as, you know, social media or SMS, or particularly in the context of emergencies where we need to quickly respond to situations. IRBs do not actually are sufficient to help us in those contexts. And then there are some evolving legal landscapes. You know, many countries don't have them. Some of them recently started them. So this is also something that we quite struggled with on how to balance practice guidelines that could take into account some of the existing legal landscapes of the country offices that we're working with. And then finally, there was very limited guidance from the USAID side and to the implementing partners on how to practically apply them. So we took this kind of like interdisciplinary approach of how to work on these guidelines. We obviously took a three-phase approach. The first one was to do a literature review of the landscape and legal analysis. And you know, we wanted to go and get into the details of what policies and guidelines already exist, what aspects of responsible data management do they address that could help USAID draft a more comprehensive guidance on the responsible data management of its programs. So we went into a research phase and tried to see that we should not, you know, redevelop or invent from the scratch, but we should draw from existing practices that CRS has done. You know, the Responsible Data Forum has done a lot of work. You know, Oxfam has done quite a lot of work. The UN has done quite a lot of work. So we actually wanted to get into the details on what is actually reflected, and we could draw upon that. The second thing that we did was about having some more detailed, you know, interviews with USAID stakeholders and their to get and record their perspectives on what is actually the need, what are the major challenges and issues that they face in the development context, and how can we actually embed these practices into these existing programs. And then through an iterative manner, we actually went and selected 4 case studies in Kenya and Nigeria to make sure that we provide a context of the real-world implementation and challenges of the responsible data practices. We wanted to discover on what works and what is not working, and how programmatic implementations could take into account these practices. So we, in an iterative manner, went through these case studies, we presented our guidelines, and then we got their feedback and refined these guidelines. Finally, these guidelines have not been published yet, so hopefully in early 2018, USAID is going to publish them live. But this is sort of the framework that we came up with. So the responsible data practice guidelines will be managing these tensions between you know, privacy and security of the data for decision making, and then transparency/accountability. They prioritize the use of data for the benefits of the data subject by proactively analyzing the benefit risks of those impacted, including the ethical and legal considerations, and following the context-specific industry best practices. So that's sort of the framework that we will be following. And this framework is actually going to consider kind of like as a principle-based approach to make sure that they are grounded into existing legal frameworks and USAID practices and policies. they are balanced to make sure that we use the data at the same time protect beneficiaries' privacy and also use that data for good end purposes. They need to be flexible because practices are grounded in real-world context experiences, as Shubha alluded to before. They have to be evidence-based and then forward-looking because to make sure that we allow room for technological change. Thank you so much for this, and then we are happy to get questions and answer them.
Thank you very much, Barry and Shubha. Just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box. We've been getting a lot of questions in, so that's fantastic. Now we have some time for Q&A, and we'll go mostly chronologically through your questions, but also probably mix it up a little bit, so we're not, so one of the first questions we received was for Catholic Relief Services. It was about if you could share your CRS data protection guideline. Steve, are you able to say a few words to that? Do we have audio for Steve? Is he still with us? Okay. I can't see him right now. Okay. Maybe we'll just, while we fix that, jump to the next question. John, do you have audio? Are you connected?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, excellent. We have a couple of questions for you, if I may sort of submit one of the questions. So one of the first question was what platform you're using for data collection storage for the data just shown on Power BI.
Yeah, so we collect the majority of our data through iForm, and as a source database, we store the data there on Xerion's cloud database, and then we pass it into an Azure SQL database. That's where we do our data cleaning and staging. We do that in part to have a staging database, but also because iForm won't connect natively to Microsoft products. So I know through Comcare or through some other solutions, you can connect directly to Microsoft products, but iForm will not. So that's how we store and transfer that.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's already answering the next question. That was also about data collection. And there was one more question. How do you incorporate qualitative data into this process?
Yeah, I mean, qualitative data, at least in Lao, it's a totally different animal. So it doesn't fit directly into dashboards. I personally don't like any of the visualizations for qualitative data that I see out there. I have kind of strong feelings against word cloud. So we do qualitative data collections, and we have meetings and so on about that, but it sort of follows a different track and a different path than how we handle our quantitative data.
Okay, thank you very much, John.
Yeah.
We will share some. I think the first question was around the CRS data protection guidelines, so we can share some information on that afterwards. I now have a question for Barry and Shubha. Let me just double check where this question is. Sorry, it was about examples. I just lost this question. Oh yeah, could you please share samples of responsible data practice guidelines? I don't know if there's anything you maybe are able to add beyond your presentation. I don't know who wants to take this question. Should we, Shubha, do you want to answer first?
Sure, I can take a crack at it. I wanted to point out that the USAID Responsible Data Practice Guidelines, which as Barry mentioned, actually arose from doing a very systematic approach of looking at all existing responsible data practice guidelines and policies that are already published and available, and then sort of synthesize the good practices out of them across a data lifecycle approach, meaning starting from the design of a project and the collection of data, the management using analysis of the data, the sharing of the data, the closeout of the project, the archiving of data. That's the approach we've taken. That guideline will, like as Barry mentioned, hopefully become public in the early spring. But we looked at over 16 resources of published responsible data practices, policies, or white papers from different organizations. And just to mention a few, we looked at things from the UN Global Pulse. You can look them up. The Cash Learning Program has put out responsible data practices. Oxfam has a responsible data handbook, and several other training resources that they have made live recently. World Food Program also has data privacy and protection, responsible data practices guidelines out there. So these are just a few that we meant to mention, and I hope those are a good starting place for identifying responsible data practices for different aspects of your data lifecycle.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We can share some links in the summary document, so we can collect some of those links and share them.
Actually, we have a slide that we did not have in this particular presentation, which I'm happy to share with you. Barry, and we had put this together with our implementing partner and contractor, Sunjara. So we have that slide, and we can share that with you, which lists some of these resources that we looked at and then sort of brought together good practices across this data lifecycle. So what we've done is consolidate and build, and also add based on our stakeholder interviews and the case studies that we did to build a guideline for USAID.
Yeah, at this stage, I think we would be able to share that list. So Shubha, go ahead and we can share that list. But also, like in early spring, as Shubha mentioned, we will also be able to share kind of like a 200 pages synthesized document of kind of like bringing and analyzing on what does it mean to be responsible, on how people are perceiving PIIs, in different ways. So that document is going to be released in early 2018. So that's going to be a good resource for the community.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think the next question I have, that's probably a good question for maybe everybody to sort of just chip in sort of their key one-line response. It was initially addressed for CRS, but so the question is, what are the main challenges and lessons learned from the implementation of your new data journey? I was wondering if maybe I can ask each of the speakers to give me sort of an answer of what you would consider your sort of key challenge. Let's see, Steve, are you able to connect to your audio? Do you want to give it a try? Okay, that might still be an issue. John, do you mind sharing your sort of key challenge or key lesson learned?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, it's keeping your audience in mind. So when we first started doing a lot of these things, I would kind of nerd out and get very excited about some of the things that were possible and wouldn't have the audience in mind when building out dashboards or trying to talk about whatever looked interesting to me. So I think always keeping that presence of like, what is the message that you're trying to get across, and how do people want to receive that? That's helped improve uptick for us.
Thank you very much. Shubha, what have you seen as sort of a key challenge or a key lesson learned in your previous project?
So what I would say is that, first of all, I think a lot of implementing partners and organizations are truly trying to balance these tensions around data use and data privacy and opening up data on a day-to-day basis, and they struggle with it. And they everybody has the intention to be responsible with their data, right? But what we realized is, in addition to policies and even good practice guidelines, we see many organizations repeatedly asking for a strategy or an approach to integrate it into their organization. To be responsible requires different elements of an organization to come together. The technology aspect, the leadership that has to support and push for responsible data practices, information security, legal counsel, and frequently all of those people have to sort of come together to create buy-in and also to operationalize responsible data practices within an organization. I don't think any one organization has figured out that answer yet, but I think that's a place where there is a lot of room to think about what are the best strategies for an organization to make sure these practices are actually operationalized. How do we bring it into the culture of an organization, whether that's a donor like USAID or a large implementing organization.
Okay, thank you very much. And Barry, do you have any sort of closing closing remark to this? Unfortunately, we're already at the end of our Q&A.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, the use of the data is kind of like an ongoing challenge that I see in the developing countries. I often feel that the design of programs is totally isolated from the use of the data itself. So I look forward in future that people organize and design programs that from the design or from the very beginning, adaptive use of the data is being infused into these systems, because no matter whatever we do, we cannot overcome the bureaucracies. So unless we infuse flow systems, flow data into these programs, it is quite difficult for developing countries, and particularly the programs that we design, to make decisions based on the data that has come. So that is one thing. And another thing that I see is a lot of people talk about the real-time data a lot these days. I think it's certainly great, but I think the right-time data is also more important than the real-time data. Just because the way technology is, running at a high pace, developing countries are often not able to catch up with that. So it's more important to contextualize the use of that data more towards the right time rather than the real time. I think that is also something.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That is also a very good point for me to address our real-time data we have collected from you in our polls. We had a bit of an issue with our poll questions, but we did ask you what is your role in data management, and it seems like there is a very widespread audience. So there's there's a peak of data analysis and data models. So about 25% of you are involved in this, and then there's a fairly even spread across data collection, data processing, storage, and data advice, and others. So very diverse audience. I thank you all very much for joining this webinar. So I have one more quick announcement to make for our ICT4D conference, and maybe we could just have that slide, please. We have opened our call for speakers, and so the conference will take place from the 8th till the 10th of May in Lusaka, Zambia, and you can see the link here, but we will also share that later in our document. So the call for speakers is now open. It will be open until the 15th of January, and we are particularly interested in innovations and practical use of digital technologies around agriculture, health, education, livelihoods, humanitarian response, digital financial inclusion, and of course ideas around sort of data management and data strategy. So please keep that in mind, and I hope to see you in Lusaka in person. Whereas the next webinar will take place on the 16th of January, and it will be on blockchain. So we have speakers from UNCDF and a few others confirmed, and we'll talk a little bit about what's hype and what's practical reality. Until then, I wish you a wonderful holiday and start in the new year. But before you leave, we do have another poll, a final survey. We would like to ask you to rate this webinar and give us any feedback and advice you have. And we will also share with you a link to the recordings and put together a Q&A document, because we have not been able to get through all of your questions. So we will work with the speakers on the questions and provide you some more information. I think that's all from us.
Thank you very much, Sonia. This is Frederick, and I apologize for some of the technical issues, but appreciate all the interaction and the great Q&A facilitation by you, Sonia. And thanks to all the speakers. This is very, very informative. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.